You ever read something and just think, whoa, that feels incredibly true, but at the same time, it also sounds completely impossible? Well, that's exactly the kind of puzzle we're diving into today, looking at it through the lens of the Qur'an. And we're going to kick things off with a verse that just perfectly nails this exact feeling.
So this line comes from Surah Al-Araf. And, I mean, what an image, right? It's unforgettable. It makes it crystal clear what happens when you reject the truth. But the condition? A camel squeezing through the eye of a needle? Come on, that's just physically impossible. So what are we supposed to do with that?
So what's the deal here? Are we supposed to take this literally like some kind of physical challenge? Or is the text maybe pointing us toward a deeper kind of truth, one that works on a totally different level? You see, this one single verse, it just opens up this huge conversation about how we even read and interpret things.
Yeah, this impossible camel isn't just a quirky little puzzle. It's really a doorway. It kind of forces us to ask a much bigger question. How does Scripture even present truth in the first place? And if it's not always meant to be taken literally, what tools do we need to really understand it?
Okay, so to solve this riddle, Islamic theology doesn't really see a contradiction here. Instead, it offers a framework. It basically says there are two different kinds of truth presented in the text, and each one has its own job to do. Let's break them down.
So on one side, you've got what are called muhkamat verses. Think of these as the explicit truths. They're clear, they're direct, and they're pretty easy to get because they connect to our everyday lives and experiences. But then on the other side, you have mutashabihat verses. These are the implicit truths. They're a bit more profound, dealing with ideas that are way beyond our normal day-to-day, and, you guessed it, they require some reasoning to really grasp.
All right, so we have these two categories, the explicit and the implicit. But how do we actually use this framework? Well, the key is to come at the text with a series of logical questions, kind of like building a rational path to get to the meaning.
And this is really the first and most important question we have to ask. Are these deeper, implicit verses supposed to be all mysterious and just totally beyond our understanding, or are they actually accessible to our minds?
And the answer is a big, clear yes. These verses aren't meant to be locked away in some vault of mystery. No, they're an invitation to use our reason to contemplate. The main takeaway here is that they can be understood.
But hang on a second. If we can use logic to figure out the implicit verses, doesn't that just make them explicit too? I mean, does the distinction even matter at that point?
No, not at all. Even when we apply our reason, their fundamental nature is still different. So let's get really specific about what that difference actually is. Let's circle back to those explicit truths, the muhkamat. Their power is really in their simplicity and how directly they apply to us. We can see their truth playing out in our daily actions, in our relationships, in the world we can see and touch. They're practical, they're foundational.
Now, the implicit, or mutashabihit verses, they work differently. We don't really get them from direct experience. Instead, we understand them by thinking through their logical consequences. The truth isn't just sitting there on the surface, it's revealed in what the verse implies about the nature of reality, about God, about existence itself.
This whole distinction leads us to a really profound idea about truth itself. It's not just about what's literally written down on the page.
And this is the core idea right here. The Qur'an has truths that are woven right into the fabric of the text itself. They aren't just sitting there waiting for you to read them, they're waiting to be discovered through rational thought and reflection.
So this brings us to a challenge you've probably heard before. Somebody says, "Oh yeah? Show me where it's written." They want a literal verse for every single concept. But this entire way of thinking is actually based on a deep misunderstanding of how the text is designed to work.
The flaw here is really twofold. First, it assumes that every verse is like its own little island, with no logical ripple effects. And second, it assumes a word is like a key that only fits one single lock, that it can only have one rigid, fixed meaning. But that's just not how language, or, divine communication, really works.
Think about it like this. A single verse can be like the trunk of a tree, and from it grow all these different branches of meaning. As long as those interpretations stay connected to that core context, to the trunk, they're all valid parts of that verse's truth. It's not about finding one single point, but exploring a whole spectrum of understanding.
So, you see, these two types of verses aren't fighting with each other. In fact, they're designed to work together, to create a pathway to deeper and deeper knowledge. And there's a pretty clear path to follow. You start with what's explicit, the muhkamats.
By really mastering these foundational truths, you build the solid intellectual and spiritual groundwork you need to then approach and truly understand the more profound, implicit verses.
And here's how it all clicks together. The clear verses are the bedrock. Understanding them piece by piece becomes the very foundation for understanding the implicit ones. It's a progression, a concept that's even echoed in Surah Al-Imran. So, the ultimate takeaway here is that engaging with a text like the Qur'an isn't just some passive act of reading. It's an active journey. It's a path that starts with what's clear and, with reason as your guide, moves you into the profound.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The fact that these two types of truth exist isn't a problem, it's an invitation. It suggests that our intellect, our ability to reason, is this essential tool we were given to engage with the divine. I mean, think about it. If every single truth were simple and obvious, what would be the point?
All right, so let's jump right in. We've talked before about how some truths in Scripture are written plain as day, while others, well, they're a little more hidden. Today, we're going to dig into why that is, and how we're actually supposed to find those deeper meanings. Okay, so let's start with a puzzle, one that's really fascinated people for, like, centuries. You know how sometimes the Quran gives us these scenarios that are just, on the face of it, completely impossible? So what's up with that? Why would it say something that can literally never ever happen? To really get our heads around this, we're going to look at one of the most famous and maybe one of the most mind-bending analogies out there, the whole mystery of the camel and the needle. And look, this isn't just some weird, quirky image. It's a super powerful statement about something being absolutely impossible. But it's more than that, you see. It's actually a clue. It's like the text is waving a flag at us, saying, hey, you need to switch gears here. Stop thinking so literally and go a little deeper. So here's the key takeaway, right? When you run into something that is obviously totally impossible, the text is actually guiding you. It's pointing you towards a truth that isn't spelled out on the surface. It's basically an invitation to fire up your brain and figure out the deeper, unwritten meaning. And this right here brings us back to something we've touched on before, a really foundational idea for this whole explainer. The text has basically two different kinds of truth, and you're meant to approach them differently. So, on the one hand, you've got what are called muhkamat verses. Think of these as the explicit ones. They're clear, they're direct, super easy to get. They're the foundation for our day-to-day lives, right? But then you have the mutashabihat verses. These are the allegorical ones, just like that camel and the needle. You're not supposed to take them literally. They're there to make you think, to make you reason your way to a much bigger understanding. You know, what this really shows is that the text assumes something pretty amazing about us. It assumes we can think for ourselves. It trusts us to connect the dots between what's set out right and what's implied. So the big question is, what's the tool we're supposed to use to make that connection? Well, that tool, that's the heart of what we're talking about today. It's called logical consequence. And this is the key that unlocks all those deeper allegorical truths. So what is logical consequence? It's basically this idea that we're expected to use our living intellect, an active, switched-on brain, to figure out the implications of something, even if it's not spelled out. It's the "so that must mean" that comes after you read a statement. It's the "therefore" that just has to follow the "if." And it's really a pretty straightforward but super powerful three-step process. Step 1, just read the verse. What does it actually say? Step 2, get the context. What's going on around it? What's the point? And then step 3, draw the logical consequence. Use your reason to figure out what it has to mean. With the camel, it's a no-brainer, right? The logical consequence is that for those people, getting into paradise is completely, utterly impossible. And what's so cool about this is what it says about the text itself. It's designed to empower us. It actually trusts us to think things through. It means not every single tiny detail has to be written down. And this totally pushes back against that idea that, if it's not written here in black and white, then it's not true. Okay, but wait a minute. This raises a huge question, doesn't it? I mean, if you want people to understand, why not just write everything down? Make it all super clear. Why leave anything up to us to figure out? Well, there's a reason, and it's actually really profound. It's explained with another verse that uses this just breathtaking metaphor. Seriously, just stop and think about that. Picture every drop of water in every ocean on Earth. Now imagine that's your ink. The verse says you'd run out of all that ink before you could finish writing down the words of the Lord. I mean, wow, that's not just pretty poetry. That's a statement about sheer unimaginable scale. So what's the logical consequence of that verse? It's simple, but it'll stop you in your tracks. Divine knowledge is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. And you just can't fit something that's infinite into a book that's, well, finite. Let's try to put this into perspective. Imagine you had to write a book describing every single atom in the universe, where it is, what it's doing. You couldn't. It's impossible. That's why in science we have these neat little formulas, right? Like E equals mc squared. It's a tiny formula for a massive concept. Now, if that's true for the physical world, imagine how much more true it is for divine truth. Trying to write it all down, it's not just a bad idea, it's literally impossible. Okay, so let's tie all this together. What does this all mean for us when we pick up the book to read and to think? It means that the empty space, the stuff that isn't written down, isn't a mistake. It's not a gap. It's a deliberate invitation to think. It's like a canvas, and our minds are supposed to paint in the connections, to reason our way to the incredible truths that are just waiting for us right under the surface. And what this shows us is something really profound. It shows that faith and reason aren't enemies, they're partners. True, deep faith isn't scared of logic. It's actually completed by it. They're on the same team. Those clear, explicit Muhakamat verses, they give us the solid ground to stand on. And our reason, that's the tool God gave us to build on that foundation and reach for those bigger, unwritten truths in the Mutashabihat. So that leaves us with one last thing to think about as we wrap this up. The text isn't just a static instruction manual. It's alive, it's a dynamic source of wisdom. And if we really embrace our role as believers who think and use reason as the key he's given us, well, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other amazing truths are just waiting for us right there in that infinite ink, ready to be discovered? Welcome. Today we're going to dive into something truly fascinating, the different layers of meaning you can find within the Qur'an. We'll be exploring how it speaks to us through statements that are crystal clear, but also through truths that are way more symbolic. And you'll see how these two styles are actually designed to work together in perfect harmony. So let's jump right in with one of the most powerful and honestly unforgettable images from the Qur'an. I mean, a camel passing through the eye of a needle. It describes something that sounds completely impossible, right? It's designed to make a point with some serious dramatic force. But what is that point really? And this immediately brings up a huge question for us. Should we just take this literally, as a super vivid way of saying never gonna happen? Or is this image actually a signpost pointing us toward a much deeper truth that isn't just spelled out for us on the surface? That's the question that really gets our whole exploration started. To really get to the bottom of this, we need to look at two fundamental types of verses that we find in the Quran. You can think of them as two different ways of communicating, and each one has its own special purpose. Let's break this down. So on one side, you have the muhkamat verses. These are the explicit ones, clear, simple, foundational truths. Think of this as the solid bedrock of a building. And then, on the other side, you have the mutasabihat verses. These are the implicit, layered, symbolic ones. They're like the beautiful, complex, and profound structure that's built on top of that bedrock. Okay, so first things first, let's get a really solid handle on that bedrock, the Quran's core teachings. These verses are known as muhkamat. So what are these verses exactly? Well, they're the ones whose meaning is totally direct, completely unambiguous. They contain all the core principles, the laws, the ethical guidelines that really serve as a practical guide for how to live. There's no guesswork here. The message is meant to be absolutely clear. And these verses play such a critical role. They're not just some random list of rules. They actually form the practical, logical foundation for everything else in the faith. They ground our spiritual understanding in clear, everyday principles and give us the essential tools we need to build a much deeper connection to the overall message. All right, now that we've got our foundation set, let's build on it and turn to the other type of verse, the mutashabihat. And this is where the layers of meaning start to get really incredible. Think of these verses less like an instruction manual and more like profound poetry or maybe a complex scientific equation. They hold these immense truths, but they express them through symbols, allegories, and really multi-layered language. They don't just hand you the answer. They kind of invite you on a journey of discovery to find it for yourself.
Okay, so this brings us to a really important question. You might be thinking, well, if these verses are so complex, are they just meant to be a puzzle we can never solve? Forever mysterious? Or is there actually a key that can help us unlock their profound meanings?
The answer, and this is the beautiful part, lies in the relationship between these two types of verses. They're not totally separate things. They're actually connected by a bridge. And that bridge, it's our God-given ability to reason and to understand.
An analogy from science can actually make this connection perfectly clear. So let's just imagine for a second that we're trying to understand a really complex law of physics.
Okay, step 1. You get a really detailed, step-by-step explanation, right? It's all written out in simple sentences. This is just like a muhkamat verse. It lays out the foundation clearly and simply so anyone can get it. Next, your brain kicks in. You start to use logic to analyze that explanation, to really understand the principles and the consequences behind those simple statements. This process, this act of reasoning, that's the bridge. And finally, after all that, the entire detailed explanation gets condensed into a short, elegant, totally symbolic formula. An equation as simple as E equals mc squared holds a universe of meaning, right? And that is just like a mushtabihat verse. So here's the absolute key. You can't just be handed a formula like E equals mc squared and get its true depth without first having that foundational explanation. And it's the exact same idea here. The clear muhkamat verses are the essential key you need to unlock the meaning of the symbolic mutashabihat verses. One helps you understand the other. So the path to deeper understanding becomes pretty clear, right? You start by mastering the simple foundational truths. Then you use your reason to explore their logical consequences. And it's through that process that the profound symbolic truths start to light up and make sense. Now, this whole framework, it has a massive implication for how we approach not just the Qur'an, but really all knowledge and truth in general. It's a real game changer. You hear this point of view a lot, right? That if a truth isn't spelled out word for word explicitly, then it's not valid. But what we're seeing here suggests that's a pretty limited view. In fact, the Qur'an itself points to a reality that's just way too vast to be contained only in explicit statements. I mean, just listen to this verse. It's absolutely breathtaking. It powerfully shows us that divine knowledge is infinite. Trying to write it all down would be like trying to empty the entire ocean with a single pen. The book isn't the ocean itself, it's the map that teaches you how to navigate it. So the takeaway here is really profound. The Qur'an itself is encouraging us to look beyond just the written word. It gives us the foundational principles, the muhkamat, and then it invites us, it challenges us to use our reason to explore that vast, incredible ocean of implicit truths, the mutasabihat, that flow from them. And this leaves us with a final question to really think about. If the truth we're all seeking is as vast and deep as an entire ocean, is it really enough to just stand on the shore reading the words written in the sand? Or does true understanding begin when we finally build a ship of reason and set out to explore its incredible depths?